The first keynote is that the avoidance pain doesn't start where you think it starts. It doesn't begin the moment you stop texting. It begins the moment your absence stops being temporary. In the early days, an avoidant often feels relief. Not because you didn't matter, but because the pressure of closeness has finally dropped. Their nervous system calms, the emotional intensity disappears, and the silence feels like control. They tell themselves a story that makes the distance feel clean. This is better. I needed space. It was getting too heavy. And if you're the anxious or emotionally available one, this can feel insulting because you're sitting in discomfort while they look calm. But that calm is not closure. It's avoidance doing what it was designed to do: shut down vulnerability before it overwhelms them. This keynote is about understanding that for avoidance, distance is a sedative. It numbs the part of them that gets activated by intimacy. When you don't come back, their first reaction is often to enjoy that sedation, to breathe again, to feel like they've escaped something that was threatening their emotional independence. They don't feel the loss immediately, because the loss is still abstract. As long as they believe you might return, or they could return later if they want, the silence still feels safe. It's like a door they think they can reopen whenever they choose. But then something shifts. Days pass, then weeks, and your absence stays consistent. No emotional paragraphs, no late-night weakness, no checking in. No, I miss you. That gives them reassurance. You don't play the old role. And now the avoidant mind starts to realize, this isn't a pause, this might be permanent. This is where the real pain begins, because the sedative stops working when the brain understands it might have actually lost something. The pain is not romantic at first. It's not soft and poetic. It's more like an ego bruise and a control wound. Avoidants are used to being the one who pulls away and still remains wanted. They are used to people orbiting. They are used to having access even when they are inconsistent. So when you don't come back, the first sting is, wait, they're not chasing. That creates a strange internal instability, because the avoidant no longer has proof of their impact. They lose the mirror of your attention. They lose the comfort of knowing they can disappear and still be held in someone's heart. And that loss of the mirror triggers something deeper: uncertainty. They start asking questions they hate. Did I misjudge them? Did I push too far? Did I lose control? Are they moving on? Am I replaceable? These questions don't feel like love, they feel like threat. Because avoidance often ties safety to control, and when control is threatened, the nervous system spikes. Suddenly, the distance that felt like relief starts to feel like risk. Not because they suddenly became secure, but because they can't regulate themselves through power anymore. This is why they often hover before they fully return. They check your stories. They watch your profile. They ask mutual friends. They look for evidence you still feel something. They want data. They want reassurance. They want to know if the door is still open without having to knock. Because knocking is vulnerability. Knocking means admitting you matter. Knocking means risking rejection, and rejection is the one feeling they've organized their entire attachment strategy around avoiding. So the first keynote is simple. Their pain begins when your absence becomes real to them, when the fantasy of easy access collapses. And if you break at that moment, if you come back just as they begin to feel the consequence, you rescue them from the very lesson that could have changed the dynamic. You teach them that silence always wins, that withdrawal always works, that you will always return to restore connection without requiring repair. But if you don't come back, if you stay steady, the avoidant finally has to face the truth they've been postponing. That love can be lost, not because you stopped caring, but because they kept choosing safety over intimacy. And that's where the pain becomes real, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Because the one thing avoidance cannot handle forever is consequence without comfort. The second keynote is that the avoidance pain isn't the kind that makes them run toward you. It's the kind that makes them wrestle with themselves. When you don't come back, the first phase hurts their sense of control, but the second phase hits something more personal, their identity, because avoidants often survive by believing a certain story about themselves. I don't need anyone. I'm fine alone. I'm stronger when I'm not attached. People leave, so I leave first. Closeness is risky. That story protects them. It keeps them from feeling exposed. It keeps them from admitting how deeply they can bond when they allow it. And your absence becomes the moment that story starts cracking, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, uncomfortable way that they can't easily numb. This is where they start feeling a pain they almost never talk about, the pain of being the one who lost something because of their own pattern. Not because you were perfect, but because you were consistent, you showed up, you tried, you cared. And if they push that away, then your absence forces them to face an ugly question. Was I the reason this ended? That question is terrifying to an avoidant because it implies responsibility. It implies they had a choice. It implies they could have done better. And responsibility is the opposite of avoidance. Responsibility is standing in discomfort instead of escaping it. So what do they do with that internal pressure? They split it into two feelings. I'm fine. Pride says, they were too much. Pride says, this is for the best. Longing says, I miss them. Longing says, they made me feel safe. Longing says, I don't like this emptiness. And they bounce between these two states like a pendulum. One day they convince themselves they don't care. The next day they feel a strange ache when something reminds them of you. A song, a place, a message thread, the way you used to speak to them. And because longing feels like need, and need feels like weakness, they often convert longing into irritation, coldness, or silence. They'd rather look indifferent than feel dependent. This is why their pain can look like nothing from the outside. They may not post sad quotes. They may not call you crying. They may even look like they moved on quickly. But internally, what they're experiencing is a tension they hate, wanting connection while resenting the fact that they want it. The pain is not just missing you. The pain is missing you while their nervous system is screaming that closeness equals danger. So the second keynote is the internal war. They miss the comfort you gave them, but they fear the vulnerability it would take to return properly. They want the benefits of you, but they don't want to admit how much they benefited. They want reassurance, but they don't want to ask for it. They want you back, but they want you back in a way that doesn't require them to own what they did. That's why they often hover and test instead of repair and commit. And here's the part most people don't understand. When you don't come back, they start confronting a very specific emptiness, the absence of your emotional labor. You were the one who smoothed tension. You were the one who repaired misunderstandings. You were the one who kept the connection alive when it got uncomfortable. Even if they didn't appreciate it in the moment, your absence exposes how much you carried. The relationship didn't just lose love, it lost maintenance. It lost a person who made closeness possible. And that absence creates a quiet instability in them. Because now there's no one to regulate the relationship for them. This is when they often try to regain stability without vulnerability. They might distract with work, friends, rebound attention. They might seek validation elsewhere to prove they're still desirable. They might tell themselves you were replaceable. But if you truly mattered, those distractions don't fully settle the ache. They just delay it. Because your absence keeps pressing on the same truth, they can't restore what they lost without changing what caused the loss. So the second keynote is not, they cry every night. The second keynote is worse for an avoidant. They feel the consequence and they can't admit it. They feel the void and they can't name it. They feel regret, and they try to bury it under pride. And the longer you don't come back, the the harder it becomes for them to pretend. Because the silence removes their favorite escape, the belief that they can always return, and you will always be there. The third keynote is where the avoidance pain turns from private discomfort into visible behavior. Because once your absence feels permanent, and the internal war gets too loud, they start trying to regain access without fully surrendering control. This is the phase where they don't just miss you. They feel threatened by what your silence might mean. Not just, I lost them, but I might be replaced. I might become irrelevant. I might not have a way back. And for an avoidant, that is a deep nervous system panic, because their safety has always been built on one quiet belief that they can retreat and still remain wanted. When you don't come back, you break the pattern that kept them emotionally comfortable. You remove the invisible safety rope, the one that said, even if I pull away, they'll still reach. Even if I go cold, they'll still soften. Even if I disappear, they'll still reopen the door. Your silence is not just silence, it's the first real consequence they can't talk their way around. And consequence does something to an avoidant that intimacy rarely does. It forces them to face reality without a shield. So they start checking. Not because they're suddenly ready to love like a secure partner, but because the uncertainty becomes intolerable. They watch your stories like it's a pulse check. They revisit your profile like it's a craving. They ask mutual friends, casually, because direct questions would expose them. They send a message that's small enough to deny, but meaningful enough to test. Hey, how have you been? Hope you're good. Something that lets them retreat if you don't respond, and lets them pretend it wasn't that deep if you do. This is the painful truth. The avoidance pain often creates testing before it creates repair. Testing is their compromise, a way to touch the connection without risking their pride. They want to know if they still matter without having to admit you mattered. They want reassurance before they offer accountability. They want a soft landing before they confess they jumped. And if you've loved an avoidant, you know how tempting it is to take that test message as proof of growth. You want to believe it means they finally realized. But many times it means they finally got uncomfortable. Because this phase isn't just about love, it's about losing their position in your life. Avoidants may not admit it, but many of them are deeply attached to the power of being wanted without having to show up consistently. Your silence threatens that power. Your silence says, you don't get to disappear and still own me. And that hits them in a place that feels like an ego collapse, not ego as arrogance, ego as identity. The identity that says, people don't really leave me. I'm the one who controls distance. I decide when closeness happens. When you don't come back, you take that control away. So their pain begins to sharpen into urgency, but still wrapped in strategy. They might suddenly become sweeter, more attentive, more present, but only in short bursts. They might flirt, reminisce, bring up inside jokes, mention memories, anything that pulls you back into warmth, without forcing them to face the hard part. And if you respond with your full heart, if you rush into closeness just because they reappeared, you give them the one thing their nervous system was desperate for, reassurance without repair. And the moment they feel safe again, the old fear returns, closeness starts feeling heavy, accountability starts feeling dangerous, and they pull away again. That's why this keynote matters so much, because this is the phase where your response determines whether you repeat the cycle or break it, not by punishing them, not by playing games, but by refusing to hand out intimacy in exchange for breadcrumbs. You don't rescue them from the consequence. You don't make it easy for them to avoid growth. You stay calm. You stay grounded. You let them feel the weight of what they caused, because that weight is what teaches. If they truly want to come back in a real way, they will eventually have to do the one thing avoidants fear most: name the truth out loud. Not vague check-ins, not hovering, not pretending nothing happened. Real truth sounds like, I miss you. I handled things wrong. I want to talk. I want to rebuild. I'm willing to do it differently. And then, the real proof, they keep showing up after the first conversation. Not just during it. They tolerate discomfort. They don't disappear the moment emotion enters the room. The third keynote is that the avoidance pain often creates reach, outs that look like love, but are actually negotiations for access. And when you don't come back easily, you force the only choice that matters. Either they step forward with accountability, or they retreat back into the comfort of distance, and you finally see what they were truly capable of all along. The fourth keynote is where the avoidance pain becomes regret. Not the soft romantic kind, but the sharp kind that comes from realizing they lost something valuable, because they refused to stay emotionally present. This is the stage where they can no longer blame the ending on timing or space, or too much pressure, because your silence has stayed consistent long enough to expose a simple truth. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you stopped carrying it alone. And for an avoidant, that realization is brutal, because it forces them to face the cost of the strategy they've relied on their whole life. Avoidant distance is usually a way to escape discomfort. But when you don't come back, they discover that distance doesn't just reduce discomfort, it also reduces connection. And now they're stuck with the emptiness that distance creates. They start realizing that the calm they chased wasn't peace, it was numbness. It was the absence of accountability. It was the absence of emotional responsibility. It was quiet, but it wasn't love. And once the nervous system settles, once the daily distractions stop working, they begin to feel something they try hard not to feel. That they might have made the wrong choice. This regret often shows up late, because avoidants don't process grief in real time. In real time they shut down. They detach. They intellectualize. They distract. They convince themselves they're fine. But later, when the threat of closeness is gone, the emotions they avoided begin to surface from a safer distance. That's why avoidance can look unbothered for weeks, then suddenly reappear months later with a strange intensity. It's not that they suddenly remembered you. It's that their defenses finally ran out of fuel. In this phase, they replay moments you thought they didn't care about. The little ways you showed up, the warmth you gave them, the stability you created, the way you tried to talk things through, even when they resisted. They remember how you made them feel seen, and then they remember the moment they felt too seen. They remember the safety and the fear at the same time. And the most painful part is that they begin to see the imbalance, how much you carried, how often you bridged the gap, how many times you returned after they pulled away, how many opportunities they had to choose repair and didn't. But regret in an avoidant is complicated, because it triggers shame. And shame is dangerous to them. Shame makes them feel exposed, flawed, unlovable. So instead of moving directly toward you with honesty, they often move sideways. They try to reduce the shame by rewriting history, telling themselves you were too emotional, that you overreacted, that it wouldn't have worked anyway. Or they try to reduce shame by reaching out in a casual way, pretending it's no big deal, so they don't have to face the truth of what they lost. Or they avoid shame by diving into a rebound, not because they're healed, but because attention temporarily numbs regret. And yet, even with all those defenses, regret keeps leaking through, because your absence is still there, steady and undeniable. They can't resolve the regret by getting distracted, because the regret isn't just missing you. It's missing what you represented, a connection that asked them to grow. And growth is exactly what avoidance resists. So they feel trapped between two pains, the pain of staying stuck in their pattern, and the pain of changing it. This is the phase where they may finally start to see you differently. Not as someone they could keep at arm's length, but as someone who had the strength to leave. That can create a strange respect mixed with fear. Respect, because you didn't collapse. Fear, because if you can leave, you can stay gone. And that fear can push them toward contact. But the quality of that contact tells you everything. If they come back with nostalgia, flirting, and sweetness but no ownership, they're trying to soothe the regret without doing repair. If they come back with accountability, naming what happened, acknowledging what they did, and asking for a real conversation, that's regret turning into growth. The fourth keynote is that the avoidant's deepest pain is not losing you in a dramatic moment. It's realizing later, in quiet, that you were the kind of love they said they wanted, and they still ran, and now your absence is teaching them what their pattern really costs. The fifth keynote is the final outcome. The moment the avoidance pain either becomes growth or becomes another cycle. Because when you don't come back, the avoidant eventually reaches a point where hovering is no longer enough, testing is no longer enough, nostalgia is no longer enough. They either step into real accountability, or they retreat into avoidance and choose a life of emotional shortcuts. And this keynote matters because it explains why some avoidants return and change, while most return and repeat. At this stage, the avoidant is forced to confront the one thing their nervous system has been avoiding for years: repair. Repair is not, "I miss you." Repair is not, "I was thinking about you." Repair is not a cute message after months of silence. Repair is responsibility. It's the ability to sit in discomfort without escaping it. It's the ability to hear how their behavior impacted you, without turning it into a debate. It's the ability to admit, "I shut down. I withdrew. I avoided the hard conversations. I made you feel alone," and then prove, through consistent behavior, that they're willing to do it differently. But here's the truth: repair threatens an avoidance core defense. To repair means to be emotionally exposed. To repair means to risk being seen as flawed. To repair means to risk rejection. And that is why many avoidants choose the easier path. They try to get access without repair. They return with warmth but no structure. They return with charm but no accountability. They return with desire but no consistency. They want to touch the connection, not carry it. They want the comfort you gave them, not the responsibility that comes with keeping you safe emotionally. This is the fork in the road. If they return and you reward the return itself, they learn that pain is enough to restore access. They learn that a moment of loneliness equals a reset button. They learn that you will welcome them back as soon as they feel regret, even if nothing changes. And then the cycle restarts. Closeness returns. Relief hits. Fear rises. Distance appears again. You end up back in the same place, except now you're more tired, more suspicious, and your self-respect has taken another quiet hit. But if you don't reward contact, if you reward capacity, everything changes. You stay calm. You stay kind. But you require repair. You require clarity. You require a conversation that isn't just emotional, but practical. What happened? Why did it happen? What will be different? How will we handle conflict? What does consistency look like? What do we do when you feel overwhelmed? Because love without systems becomes chaos, and avoidant dynamics thrive in chaos, because chaos lets them disappear without being held accountable. This is where your boundary becomes the teacher. Not a boundary spoken with anger, a boundary lived with steadiness. I'm open to rebuilding, but I'm not going back to the old pattern. That sentence is the line that separates your future from your past. It does not shame them. It does not punish them. It simply states a truth. Access to you requires emotional responsibility. And then you watch their behavior. Because behavior is the only honest language in this stage. A person who is growing will respond with effort. They might be nervous, they might stumble, but they will try. They will show up again. They will communicate. They will follow through. They will tolerate the discomfort of repair, because losing you hurt enough to wake them up. A person who is not growing will resist repair. They will minimize. They will rush you. They will act offended. they will disappear again. And that disappearance will sting. But it will also give you the clearest answer you can ever receive. They wanted relief, not responsibility. This keynote is also where you release the fantasy that their pain automatically means they changed. Pain can create longing without creating maturity. Pain can create a comeback without creating capacity. Pain can make them miss you, but it does not automatically make them safe. Safety comes from skills, emotional tolerance, self-awareness, and consistent behavior over time. So your job is not to be moved by their pain. Your job is to be guided by your peace. When you don't come back, you are not trying to hurt them. You are refusing to protect them from the consequences of their own pattern. And that is the only environment where real growth can occur. If they grow, they will meet you with accountability. If they don't, they will try to enter through ambiguity and keep the cycle alive. Either way, you win, because you stop giving your heart to someone who only wants it when it's convenient. The fifth keynote is the final truth. Your absence becomes the mirror that shows them what they lost, but your standards decide whether what returns is love that can last, or a pattern that will break you again.